Alberto Paloni, and I'm an economist at the University of Glasgow. In this recording, I intend to make some observations about inflation. This video complements a set of much more detailed slides that I've written on the same topic. Inflation is a problem everyone is aware of because everyone experiences it. Indeed, over the last 12 months or so, inflation has become a major news item and preoccupation for politicians and central banks across many countries. However, it is not the case that everyone agrees on the causes of inflation and therefore on what should be done about it. Moreover, some of the arguments that are sometimes made do not appear, at least to me, particularly solid or convincing. I think, therefore, that some research on the topic of inflation is justified, besides being a timely effort. I think it is helpful to start with a review of the theories of inflation before considering the special features that characterize current inflation in the UK. And I say in the UK, but in fact, similar features are relevant in many other countries, though perhaps in different form. And I think that the review of theories of inflation should start with the monetarist explanation, but not because it is a valid or plausible explanation. Indeed, it isn't, but because it is a theory that everyone has heard of, and particularly among the public, many seem to take it for granted. The accompanying slides follow the same structure. According to the monetarists, inflation is a monetary phenomenon. When too much money is created, inflation is the inevitable outcome. It's not just the public that sees truth in this theory. Professional economists, though a minority, support this theory too. Yet, the theory makes assumptions that do not fit the empirical evidence. The slides highlight three pieces of empirical evidence. The first is that the desire to hold liquidity is affected by uncertainty. The second is that the money supply accommodates changes in the demand for money, which, as explained in the slides, implies that causality is likely to run from inflation to the money supply rather than vice versa. And the third is that firms produce normally below full capacity. All of these imply that the monetarist explanation for inflation is flawed, and that the money supply is not under control of the monetary authorities. Indeed, nowadays, central banks control the interest rate, not the money supply. And this leads us to the dominating explanation for inflation, which is that there is inflation when the interest rate is below its equilibrium level. But note that such equilibrium interest rate cannot be observed. This principle is at the basis of the so-called inflation targeting, according to which a central bank raises the interest rate when inflation is expected to be above target. All central banks in developed countries and many in developing countries target inflation in this manner. The slides then review other standard explanations for inflation, such as the theory that there is inflation when the rate of unemployment is below the equilibrium rate of unemployment, which is unobservable, or when the price of primary commodities rises. Essentially, despite this latter explanation, the standard theories of inflation see inflation as a phenomenon due to excess demand, that is, when demand exceeds the available supply. However, there are contrasting explanations for inflation that are generally less well known, but seem to fit the empirical evidence more closely. Conflict theory is at the basis of these explanations. It sees inflation as the outcome of a fight between workers and firms, or between different groups of workers, or between different firms, over the distribution of income. Besides looking at these causes of the conflict, the slides also consider other possible factors which could lead to a fight over the distribution of income, such as a rise in interest rate, a rise in the price of raw materials, and a rise in labor productivity. The spirit of conflict theory can be captured by considering that firms set prices by adding a profit margin, also called markup, to unit costs, where the latter are mainly determined by wage costs, besides productivity and raw material prices. Thus, prices embody an implicit distribution of income. If wage costs increase, the profit share of income remains unchanged only if the profit margin increases in the same proportion, that is, if prices rise. If prices are kept unchanged, the profit share falls. Thus, while the standard theories highlight the role of wage increases in causing inflation, conflict theory highlights that profits can be the drivers of inflation. And this is consistent with the empirical evidence, which shows that inflation is the result of powerful corporations being able to raise prices faster or more than smaller firms. Indeed, this explanation for inflation is particularly relevant in the current period of inflation, as corporations have been able to raise prices by more than compensating for higher energy and commodity prices, and sometimes even independently of such cost increases. The current inflationary pressures are therefore not driven by wages, but by excess profits. Pricing mechanisms in the energy market, a consequence of privatizing a sector which by nature cannot be a competitive market, together with speculative forces in energy, food, and commodities markets, are also important factors explaining current inflation. This analysis of the features of current inflation suggests that interest rate increases imposed by the Bank of England would not address the causes of inflation. Nevertheless, as explained in the slides, such interest rate rises will always succeed in eventually choking off the inflationary process, albeit at the cost of causing an economic recession. The obvious question that arises is whether this anti-inflationary strategy by the Bank of England is imposing unnecessary costs. The slides highlight that economic policy is never neutral, but creates winners and losers. Indeed, the very primacy that anti-inflationary policy is given plays a political role, as it tends to normalize wage restraint and contributes to the working class's loss of purchasing power. Interest rate rises hit particularly indebted households and smaller firms, but benefit commercial banks. I hope you will find this talk and accompanying slides useful. Please do not hesitate to contact me for any queries or comments. My contact details are in the last slide. Goodbye.